Hey, what's going on? How you doing?
Not much, just playing and maybe winning at video games. Yeah, okay. So let's roll it out. You wanted to talk with me about some studies on beloved friends of the stream trans people.
Yes. Yeah. So we can actually start. Depending on wherever you want to, but we can start with the studies you sent. So I take it someone sent you studies on puberty blockers and IQ.
Yes.
Okay. So we can go through them one by one. So the first, and just let me know if you want me to send it to you in the chat or whatnot, so we can go along at the same time, or if I could just give you a lowdown on each one that was sent.
Yeah, please do link the study to me as you say it. I can't look at it on stream right now on account of the video games and all.
Okay, sure.
Link it so that I have a sort of chronological detailing of what you're referring to.
Sure. So this was the first study that you referred. This is the Mull 2001 study.
Mm-hmm.
So this study had importantly a couple things. When they look at studies on puberty blockers and IQ in children, what they're doing in all of the studies, whether it's the Mull 2001 study or even studies that actually do have a control group, this one didn't, by the way, what they're doing is they are looking at individuals with a condition known as precocious puberty. This is a condition where these individuals have puberty earlier than they normally are supposed to have. And as a result of that, one of the indications for a GnRH agonist, which is a gonadotropin releasing hormone agonist, is to treat precocious puberty.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the issue here with all of these is that the way it's set up, even when there is a control group, what they generally will present it to you is they will show you a study, say, oh, look what happened here. We have a group of, in the case of the Mull study, what they did was, we have a group of individuals with precocious puberty. We gave them a GnRH agonist, and from time point T1 to T2, it could be a given amount of years from follow-up time since they were treated, their IQ decreased. And it's going to be like maybe 5-7 points or something like that. It's not a clinically relevant, although it'll be a statistically significant decrease. And it'll be like, aha, there it is. Like, see, GnRH agonists decrease IQ. Right off the bat, the issue with Mull study is there's no control group at all. Mm-hmm. So the obvious concern here is that you could always say, well, wait a minute, it would have decreased. Maybe it would have decreased even more. Maybe a GnRH agonist actually prevents it from going as low as it would have otherwise.
The GnRH agonist you're referring to here, can you describe that to me, please?
Oh yeah, it's an acronym for a puberty blocker.
Okay, gotcha. Because I was thinking for a second, it felt like it was a substitute for that, but I didn't. I wasn't entirely sure.
It's gonadotropin release. Yeah, it's gonadotropin releasing hormone agonist. So the way your hypothalamus releases GnRH, which acts on the pituitary gland to release certain hormones, whether it be testosterone or estrogen or whatnot. Now, the normal way that this happens is it's a pulsatile manner, so this hormone gets released in a pulsatile fashion naturally in the body. Mm-hmm. But when it's continuously stimulated, then actually it has an inhibitory function on the pituitary, so it actually doesn't release these sex hormones, and that's actually how the puberty suppression is performed. So the medication is given in a non-pulsatile manner in this, whether it be a continuous administration, which is not done. It's really just like a administration that is formulated in such a way that it slowly releases in the body over time. which is effectively, from the hypothalamus' perspective, a continuous release. But in any case, the GnRH or GnRH agonist is just gonadotropin releasing hormone agonist.
Gotcha.
And that is the class of things that are puberty blockers. They're not always used for blocking puberty; they're used for other things too. But in this case, that's the class.
Gotcha.
So the evidence for IQ in all studies that I've seen come from, and all the studies that you've cited or referred, come from not transgender individuals. They're not actually studying transgender individuals here. They're studying individuals who have a different medical condition. Oh, sorry, transgender is not a medical condition. No, they're studying individuals who have a medical condition that are not transgender.
It's too late. You're already canceled, my friend. The horns have already been called.
I know.
So
that's it. I'm transmedicalist. That's what, yeah.
So there are some people in chat who seem a bit confused. So the reason why we're having this conversation is because I was interested in some studies concerning trans people, which we're going to be discussing. Not, I think, especially at length. I mean, we don't need a doctor's understanding, but at the very least, I want to know this well enough to rebut arguments when provided them. Specifically, right now, we're talking about a few studies which seem to indicate that taking puberty blockers leads to a reduction in IQ. And we're taking this study by study because there are only, I think, like 4 or so which make this claim. At least that's the 4 that I've been provided. And the first argument here, which we've been provided from... Actually, I'm sorry, could you give your name and pronouns just as a sort of more formal introduction?
Oh, sure, yeah, no worries. No, yeah. It's he, him.
Gotcha. By the good doctor, comma, he, him over here, is that this first study we're referring
I'm sorry,
to...
was I supposed to give you my name too? Did I just let the botch that introduction? You can just call me Avi, it's fine. I'm Avi Bitterman, I'm a medical doctor. I've been, I'm involved in research and clinical trials for several years. I work in an academic institution, and I'm also involved in, I'm also a content creator. I'm involved in debates, etc., etc. So yeah, and pronouns are human.
Right. And we only, of course, listen to the medical opinions of debate bros like myself. So it's important to keep it in-house. So the first arguments being provided here for the first study that we've read is that essentially its relevance is contestable because A, there's no control group, and B, we're not even talking about trans kids here. We're talking about people who had precocious puberty, meaning the puberty blockers are being assigned not to alleviate dysphoria, but rather because they were literally experiencing puberty too soon. Yeah,
that's right. Now, one thing I'll tell you is that it's interesting. So the natural course of precocious puberty in terms of IQ is poorly studied. However, to what degree that it has been studied, and here's a paper that I'll find for you that has studied this, is that when precocious puberty happens, there is an initial IQ boost, quote unquote, that happens. So IQ is measured based on kids of the same, they age match the children.
Right.
And when you initially go through precocious puberty, this really early puberty, what you end up getting is this increase in IQ. That's what the idea is. You'll often find that these children end up skipping grades. However, after that happens, the IQ drops to normal levels. It ends up being a wash.
And is that that's not because the kid's gotten stupider, it's because they are falling in line with the IQ curve of children their age.
Yes.
They get the initial boost because their brain matures faster because of the precocious puberty, but that process only lasts so long, and after that, the curve rounds back, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
So they basically end up where they normally would have anyway. Now, this is really important because on all of this tends to happen from the transition of childhood to adolescence. Adolescence is defined as the ages of 10 to 19.
Right.
Now, the reason this is really important is because that's around the time that these individuals, if you look at the ages, right around that transition time is when these studies recruited these children and looked at their IQs before and after. So what you very well could be just seeing here is just these children, you're catching them when they already had the IQ boost. And so they're expected to have a decrease in IQ regardless of what you do.
Gotcha.
Just because they're falling in line.
I imagine that this is going to be a recurring theme of these studies then. That they're going to be about precocious puberty, and that the IQ drops are not going to be because of the puberty blockers, but rather the natural recession back towards the mean after the benefits of early puberty are experienced. Yes.
Yes, that's present in 2 of the studies that have actually looked at IQ and GnRH agonists. There are 2 main ones. One doesn't have a control group. One does have a control group. But yeah, that's the idea. Now, bear in mind, not all of this is like perfectly studied. Some of it of that temporary boost is inferred by catching early IQ increases. Some of it's inferred by grade skipping, which has been a consistent finding. It's not a perfect inference, but that's the current, like, in the literature, that's at least the prevailing, like, hypothesis of what's happening in this progression. But in either case, even if that turns out to not be the case, like, what you really need to do is you need to look at transgender individuals and say, okay, well, what we need to do is, like, okay, here's a GnRH agonist, compare that to individuals who desired the GnRH agonist but did not actually get the GnRH agonist, and follow them over time, or even if it's just longitudinally retrospective versus prospective, just something. The point is that the most important thing in studies is to have an apt comparison group. You need to see what you're comparing it. If you're not comparing anything, you don't have any control group, you're just saying what's happening before and after. You really can't tell much of anything except this was a value here and this was a value there. The important question here is what would have happened otherwise. And I'll tell you a little bit of this is a recurring theme in medicine too, because this is actually something that happened in terms of with antidepressants as well. So antidepressants in pregnancy have been linked to certain malformations, Budd-Chiari malformations, autism. And what the study did was they looked at depressed individuals who received an SSRI, and then they looked at pregnant individuals in the general population who did not receive an SSRI. And they found that individuals who were born had a higher rate of abnormalities. Now, the obvious issue here... Yeah,
the obvious issue there would be that maybe the people who didn't feel as though they needed to take an SSRI were in a good spot to begin with.
Yeah, the issue could just be that it's not the SSRI that's doing it, it's the depression that's doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
And lo and behold, when they redid the study, and they actually looked at individuals who were depressed and got an SSRI versus were not depressed and got SSRI, there was no increased risk of malformations.
You know,
there was no increased risk of autism.
An anomalous number of people die shortly being after hooked up to life support. Really makes you wonder about that, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's and you'll find that this is also a bit of a recurring theme. So what you really want to do, and none of these studies have done, is look at transgender individuals. Transgender individuals who desired the puberty blocker received it. Transgender individuals who desired the puberty blocker did not receive it. None of these studies do that, and that's the main issue. There are other issues as well.
I'm sure, but that's sufficient. I'm sure there are other issues with the methodology and the medicine and what have you. Let me see really quick. So I linked you 4 studies, and these were studies linked to me by a concerned fan. They sent them to me over email. Let me just look at them really quick and mute the game. Okay. Let's see. So this one. Idiopathic.
Are you looking at the first? The first one was Mull.
Yes, I see mole. Okay. The second one that I linked to you, cognitive, emotional, and psychosocial functioning of girls treated with pharmacological puberty blockage for idiopathic central precocious puberty. So this would have the same problem because it studies precocious puberty. The dip in IQ would be associated with a regression back towards the mean after the initial benefits of precocious puberty act out. So the second two that I linked to you both specifically mention gender dysphoria.
Yeah, they do. So the first thing that you'll note is the third paper you mentioned is not, I mean, if you want to call it a study, that's fine. What it is a case report, which is essentially a glorified anecdote. So it's not, it's like saying that here's an individual, this individual had, not only is there no control group, there's just, it's an N equals 1. Not to say that case reports are completely useless. They're things that are initially there to form certain hypotheses, and not to draw any conclusions. So the third one, you'll find that it's really just, it's weird because it's like it doesn't say case report in the title. It just says brain maturation, cognition, voice pattern, and in a gender dysphoria case.
Yeah, it says
so it does
that
say case.
In a gender dysphoria case. That is kind of odd.
Yeah.
Why would you commit this to a paper unless you were trying to fearmonger over this one set of results? Is this common to publish a single case report?
So case reports can be published commonly. The purpose of a case report is not, the issue is they're commonly misused. More so than the issue isn't that they get published. The issue is that there's a major chasm between the way that professionals, the way scientists, the way doctors understand where case reports fit into the evidence hierarchy, and where laymen understand that case reports fit into the evidence hierarchy. A layman can read something like this and be like, "Oh my gosh, this is such like a cause of concern." When in reality, this is just a case of one individual that had their anecdote very well described.
Yeah, here's the
That's
issue.
What case reports are. They're glorified. Yeah.
It says that over the course of 28 months, the operational memory IQ dropped 9 points and remained stable. Yeah, they transitioned into a woman, right?
The IQ. Wait,
sorry, I was making a joke about girls being dumb. I'm sorry. Sorry.
You're the one getting canceled now.
Yeah, okay. I don't actually know. The language here is really unclear as to whether or not as to the specifics on this. I just wanted to make a woman joke. Okay, anyway. Okay. So that's good. Okay, so a case study, like there isn't even enough here to work off of, really, to like there's not even much here to really debunk. So I guess the fourth link that I gave you would be the big one, right? Because this is an actual study, and it specifically lists gender dysphoria as the as the case here.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the Costa study was really trying to show here. It didn't. I didn't see when I read it. I didn't see that they had this decrease in IQ. In fact, the metrics that they did look at showed that that individuals who received the puberty blockers did have an improvement in their gender dysphoria. Then now those who had a delayed administration of puberty blockers also had an increase in their improvement in their gender dysphoria, although the individuals who had it immediately had a greater improvement in their gender dysphoria, although that difference did not reach statistical significance, and that could just be because of power issues or whatnot.
Yeah, let me see.
Regardless, this is
at baseline, GD adolescents showed poor functioning with a CGAS mean score of 57.7 plus or minus 12.3. GD adolescents' global functioning improved significantly after 6 months of psychological support. Moreover, these adolescents receiving also puberty suppression had significantly better psychosocial functioning after 12 months of GnRHA compared with when they had received only psychological support. Wait, I'm sorry. Wait, hold on. psychological support and puberty suppression were both associated with an improved global psychosocial functioning in GD adults. Wait, doesn't this support the counter hypothesis? Isn't the argument here that that social support and the puberty blockers actually made these kids more smart?
If I could, so they're not. I don't think they're measuring intelligence at all in this study, or at least not IQ. If I could try to because when I read this paper, I was trying to piece together well, why did they send you this? What is the possible argument here? And if I could try to steelman what someone might say, is they might say that, okay, well, if you look, it may just be a criticism of the efficacy of puberty blockers. Well, do they actually improve gender dysphoria? And you're comparing individuals who just got psychological support versus individuals who got psychological support and instead of a delayed administration of the puberty blocker, an immediate administration of the puberty blocker. And they both improved. So maybe the puberty blockers aren't actually helping gender dysphoria.
I think I actually have a much better possible explanation for why this got sent to me.
Oh, okay.
My explanation is that the person that who emailed me got in an argument with a transphobe, and that transphobe just dumped every single paper they've ever seen, assuming it supported their arguments, and not actually looking at the conclusions and finding out that, no, actually, this didn't at all. It kind of contradicts it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it looks like the only real data they have on their site isn't actually a data. It's a single case study. That's not particularly convincing.
Just to respond to the Steelman, though, I still want to, even if you are correct, to respond to if someone were to make that Steelman to you, the response is that actually individuals who had the initial administration of the puberty blocker, they actually did improve more in the CGAS. That's a scale for gender dysphoria metric. However, the difference between the two groups weren't statistically significant, but that could be for power issues. And there are other studies that look at harder endpoints, such as suicidal ideation, that are more powered. They have a greater number of participants, especially in the control group. And then it does find a decreased risk of suicidal ideation, which is a much harder endpoint than just a metric for gender dysphoria, which can proxy suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
And I'll send you that study over here.
Yes, please do. I gotta say, of all the evidence that I've seen, the evidence that gender supportive care can help lower suicidality in gender dysphoric people seems to be overwhelming. No matter where you look, how hard you look, what types of study you look for, overwhelmingly, transitioning or at least receiving some care in proportion with the extent of gender dysphoria always seems to help. Over a statistical average.
Oh, yeah. And I actually, after we're done with the puberty blocker, we wrap that up, I actually wanted to talk to you about strengthening the studies that you use in your study doc, and we can get to that as well. But let's see, what else was there any other studies? So the four, I see the 4 studies. There are other studies people throw out as well, I don't know if you've heard Lauren Southern's or if you had time to review Lauren Southern's debacle.
I am familiar with the studies she's using, and it seems like every time she talks to a lefty, she gets blown out, and then she keeps using those studies, so it doesn't really seem to make much of a difference or matter at all.
Yeah. I've offered to have a discussion with her. I haven't heard a reply back yet.
I doubt you will. It's all a clout game. I saw your thing on Twitter. Okay, so with the IQ thing managed, there was another specific thing that I wanted to ask. We don't need to speak on specific studies here, but I was interested in your general understanding of and interest in trans women in sports. To what extent does medical transition alleviate the physiological advantages that AMAB people get when it comes to athletics?
Ooh, this is a complicated topic.
I know that, and it's something that I'm going to need to look at studies myself for, but I'm interested in your general perspective. Because I used to be of the opinion that 2 years of transitioning, give or take, was almost always sufficient. that by that point the androgen sensitivity had been washed off to the extent that it wasn't so much of an issue, so on and so on. Later on, I saw more claims that that might not be the case, and I was just interested in your perspective.
Yeah, so my perspective is sort of like that. So I think that the latest I've seen, I think I've seen one study that was 3 years out of gender affirming hormone therapy, and I think they managed to find like one area where it was different in like a grip strength or something. I'd have to relook at the study, but the point is that the magnitude of these differences like very much taper off. Now, it is true, like as you mentioned, people have said that after 2 years, like there's not going to be any like meaningful difference, and there are actually some differences that remain, and so it's going to, at 2 years, my views will probably depend on what type of sport you're talking about, and it'll depend on what you consider to be a meaningful difference. And because remember, there's two things here. There's statistical significance, and then there's clinical significance. So you have to make a decision here about two things. So you have to evaluate if there's a statistically significant difference, which there was, at least in certain proxies. And you have to evaluate whether the magnitude of those differences are going to be A, relevant to the sport, which in many cases it's not, in some cases it is. Mm-hmm. And B, you have to evaluate whether that degree of difference is enough to simply like just preclude someone from participating.
You could probably find a statistically significant increase in running ability for like people in Nigeria, right? Aren't like a fuck ton of sprint and long race runners from some very specific part of Nigeria? I have no idea why.
Yeah, you can. I imagine a counter argument to that would be like, okay, well, they didn't take any drugs to get there or something like that. But here's the actually interesting one. So here's
Kenya. Yeah,
well, but first, before we get to the counters that you can give, or the logical consistency checkers, my view on like the question of whether there is some residual strength difference, my general approach is at 1 year there will be for certain metrics. At 2 years there will also be for certain metrics, although the difference decreases. At 3 years there are certain statistically significant differences. I'm not sure if the magnitude of those differences are going to be large enough to preclude. But what I will say is that there is a tapering off, and I doubt, I'll just put this on the prediction here because I don't think we have 5-year data, but I doubt there will be, just extrapolating off the 1 year mark data, the 2 year mark data, and the 3 year mark data. I doubt there's going to be a residual for the average or the overall majority of athletes at the 5 year mark. I doubt there's going to be any meaningful difference there. Now, maybe there'll be some exceptions, like if you're just like this massive bodybuilder or something, and then you undergo, maybe that's the case. I'm not sure. But for the overwhelming majority of individuals, based on the trajectory of how the data is pouring in, 1 year mark, 2 year, 3 year mark, when we get 5 year data, I doubt it's gonna happen.
Gotcha.
So that's the answer to the question of like, in terms of, yeah, go ahead.
Right. So in terms of a practical assessment of this question, like say I'm arguing with someone over, is this fair? Is this not fair? Now, from what I understand, puberty blockers, if applied at an appropriate time, would negate essentially every advantage there is to speak. Trans women would still be, I think, on average, a little bit taller, but beyond that, like, it would be essentially a meaningless difference.
I agree with that, and I think I think even even a lot of crazy conservatives would they're at the point where they're starting to agree with that.
Right. So with that being said, there's probably an inverse relationship between how much you experienced androgen sensitivity and how long you transitioned afterwards, and how that relates to like the extent to which you can fairly play, you know? So if you have been transitioning for 5 years medically, but you were also a pro athlete for like 15 years beforehand, your body was able to accrue quite a few advantages over that time. that may or may not go away with enough transition, you know? But it's I guess it's kind of hard to tell. Whereas if you maybe started transitioning when you were 18 and not an athlete, but you didn't take puberty blockers, you probably aren't going to retain as much of the androgen sensitivity benefits that you would have otherwise. There isn't really a consistent way of knowing what is fair. So I guess I'm asking you, what would you say if a person was like, okay, well, obviously there should at least be some minimum time transitioning beforehand. You can't have men transitioning for one day and then entering the Olympics, or you know what I mean. You know these people. What would your response be to this?
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff to unpack there. So the first point is just wherever you're going to define what fairness is. So what amount of advantage is going to be fair versus unfair. You want to make sure the person you're talking to is applying it consistently. So let me give you an example that you can throw at them. If men take anabolic steroids and they come off anabolic steroids, they can compete in steroid-free environments, free in like the all natural competitions. As long as the anabolic steroids wash out of them and they can pass a drug test, right? Now, if someone loads up on anabolic steroids for a long enough time, they can accrue advantages that are beyond their normal or natural capabilities. Now, the question here is just to say, okay, well, let's say we have this man who is taking a bunch of anabolic steroids for years and years and years. And then he decides to come off the anabolic steroids, and we're 1 year out. Do you think this man should be able to compete in all natural? And if the answer is no, okay, well, what about 2 years? Can he compete in all natural now? He's 2 years without any anabolic steroids. What about 3 years? 5 years? So you want to make sure that
they would probably bite the bullet on that, right? Though they would probably lie. They would be like, "Yeah, I do think that's just as unfair," even though we know they don't really care.
Yeah, like do you want to ask, like, at that point, like, okay, do you support like prescriptions to be like, okay, well, if you've ever I don't know if they would, because like this happens all the time. Like people get busted for like anabolic steroid use all the time. It's like the questions are like, okay, well, like, do you support like your favorite athlete or whatever? Like if they ever got busted, like they should never compete for like 5 years or something like that.
They get lied to all the time
because they could have been using it for. Yeah, I'm sure. So they might lie. So I mean, it's
I guess what I'm interested in, like the I don't know, like what a good base template for that would be, you know? Like the common line that I've used is, if you've been transitioning for 2 years, it is overwhelmingly likely that you're probably fine, you know? You're probably well in line with a reasonable reasonable performance. So what would, I guess, the counter to that?
Yeah, what I would say, okay, so the counter, like if I'm playing devil's advocate, the counter they're going to put to you is to say, okay, well, in certain sports, this is a really important thing, and at 2 years, here's some data that shows like this strength difference is still there, and it's like, okay, well, that's actually not like that's a meaningful difference. They'll try to pose that to you. So the approach I would take is just, okay, well, let's be clear, like there are some, for these sports where these strength differences don't matter as much as, say, endurance sports, there doesn't seem to be a big difference. In fact, there doesn't seem to be like any real difference at all. Like, so at least just to see if they're being fair, say like, okay, well, in these areas of sport, do you agree that they should be included rather than excluded? And if they don't agree to that, then it's not really fairness they're caring about. Because the data actually does show, like, yeah, it's they just care about like trans people being not part of the sport at that point.
And because the argument they make is, while there are many statistical biases in like different groups' propensities or what have you, they don't like the trans thing because they keep acting as though trans people will like transition just for athletic events, you know? Like
So
it's
weird.
it's always what they do. It's like, well, okay, sure, maybe this group tends to be better at this, but they can't just change into that if they want. Like, do you really think that? Do you sincerely believe that there are just these hordes of men who are willing to subject themselves to significant social stigma and medical treatment just so that they can perform better? And if so, like, where's the evidence of it? It doesn't exist. There's never any evidence of that, you know?
Yeah, it's important. So yeah, so I agree that for sure that's not the motivating factor here. Well, they would say that, okay, it may not be the motivating factor, but still we want to prevent something unfair from happening if it's unfair. So the response I would take is like, okay, A, logical consistency. Do you bite the bullet on these things? Okay, if so. B, okay, what about the sports where there's where there actually isn't an unfair advantage? Do you think it's okay? If yes, we can proceed to further. If no, you're not. It seems like the reason you're not actually interested in fairness, you're interested in trends. And then the next thing is, if they're just going to say, okay, well, yes, yeah, I agree, it's about fairness, so they should be able to compete in these fields, then say, okay, well, look, based on the extrapolation, it's like 3 to 5 years, even in the fields where it's like just purely strength. Based on like the way all the data is going, it doesn't seem like there's going to be any difference, any meaningful difference. Now, do you think that there's going to be an unfair advantage? If so, what's the evidence for that? If not, if not, on what do you think trans people should be precluded? Because they're not going to be able to give you 3+ year data showing this disadvantage, and the extrapolations from the data do show that disadvantage is really precipitously dropping. And if you were to look at it, it does seem like it would reduce to nothing at the 5-year mark.
Okay, gotcha. And I guess with time, more data will come out on this, so that'll be nice. It's funny because
you could definitely make a strong case. You could definitely make a very strong case for like areas, certain sports where it's just this raw strength difference is actually just not going to make the difference in it at all. So yeah, but you would definitely want to be like, okay, well, look, here's like, even at the 3-year mark, just like show like this, just, you know what I wanted to do? I wanted to actually, and I haven't done this yet, I really should have. I should have just like plotted all the data out, just at the 1-year mark, 2-year mark, 3-year mark. That's an exercise I really have to do. And just show the like different studies at their different follow-up times and show the extrapolation and just be like, okay, well, why would we preclude this for more than 5 years? So I really should do that.
At that point, the discussion has probably gone beyond the attention span and knowledge of the average conservative talking about these issues.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Not that it's a waste of time, just, of course. It sometimes feels like it.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's interesting because it is important because obviously this is like such a non-issue, like this very rarely ever ends up happening ever. On the grand scheme of things, this is like the last, like the periphery, really this should be the periphery trans issues. But it's pointed into the spotlight, and the reason it's pointed in the spotlight, I think, is because people just want something to latch onto for outrage.
Of course,
they see this unfairness, and they can,
it's also intuitively understandable, you know? They're obviously, like, at a core level, their concern with trans people is that they're icky and gross. That's pretty much the core of it, really. That's what they think, at least. But obviously that doesn't sell great as an argument. So instead they have to go on and on, you know, oh, the children, oh, you know, encouraging degenerate lifestyles, oh, sports, that's the thing. That's an instance that we can latch onto to try and make this seem like some kind of measured policy-based objection rather than just bigotry, which is all it really is. They focus on that. And same with puberty blockers too, you know, oh, you're doing this to kids, but of course puberty blockers are probably, at least data-wise, some of the most defensible like trans-oriented care you can provide. It seems like a pretty solid bullet altogether.
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation about puberty blockers by people who don't. Yeah, of course, they don't understand what they are, how they work, what their risks are, what the benefits are. But yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, I mean, that's my basic take on like sports and like my very overly simplified basic take on transgender and transgender individuals in sports.
I appreciate that. Was there another particular like data point that you wanted to hit on?
Basically just efficacy of gender affirming surgeries and mental health outcomes. So here's one thing I think that what we could do to improve our argumentation when we're dealing with individuals who deny that gender affirming therapies end up supporting outcomes for transgender individuals. What we can do is there's this thing where there's this tendency a lot of people do, and of no fault of their own really, that they think that, okay, well, if we have like this giant collection of studies, or if we have this like huge like analysis, be it the Cornell analysis or be it like there are other large meta-analyses, then that's going to be the go-to thing. Like that's going to be the thing that like most robustly shows this. And it's not necessarily the case. In fact, it's actually my view that there's like a single study or a hand group of studies that are actually far better than the entire Cornell analysis combined. And the reason for this is just extending the same logical, consistent approach that we're criticizing the transphobic scientific studies. For things like not studying the right population, not having a control group, not looking at a proxy outcome instead of the actual outcome, et cetera.
I have noticed that. I don't know if it's a product of complacency or whatever, but sometimes it does seem like there are issues that we have. I mean, our approach to it is just bulletproof, We're right. But we don't pursue validating research with the same ferocity that our opponents do. Because they'll fund research and they'll find little tiny tidbits of data and pull it together and bring whatever they can to the field. But for us, it seems sometimes like for gender affirming care, for example, all the data that I've ever seen has seemed pretty convincing on this. But so often it seems like they could have gone so much farther. Like, why are we relying on these relatively insubstantial testimonials of the doctors saying, they've spoken with their clients and this is what they had to say, and, little case studies of a few hundred people. What if we wanted to? We could probably pull the capital together for some earth-shatteringly convincing document, I mean, it won't change the transphobes' minds, but it would at least make it easy to laugh at them.
Yeah, it'll at least improve there. And there is, I do believe there actually is a system like that, which I'll stand to it to this day. Since it's not included in the Cornell review, it actually is better than the entire Cornell analysis review combined.
What is it?
You'll find that if you go into the individual studies in the Cornell analysis, a lot of them, unfortunately, do have a lot of the same issues that we're criticizing the transphobic studies for. They don't have a control group. They're looking at before and after. And the studies that do have a control group have it said 17 patients without any power analysis. Although small sample size isn't the biggest issue for certain outcomes, given certain things improving the power, but that's a different conversation. So I think what's better than citing the Cornell analysis is I'll show you a study that's far superior in just about every way than those studies that the Cornell analysis cited combined. But before I do that, I want to just go over some
really burying the lead on this one.
I want to go over some of the things you may find to understand why this study is good. So just to go through some more of the transphobic studies you may see. When I say transphobic studies, I'm not talking about I don't think the researchers are transphobic or anything. I think these are the common cited studies. I'm not going to go through the Ben Shapiro study. I know you know about that one already. I will go through the
Shapiro study?
Yeah, he didn't write a study. It's the one he cites. The Sweden study where they compared it to No, I don't expect him to ever get any peer-reviewed literature ever. But he often cites the Swedish cohort study, which compared it to not trans people in the control group, compared it to cisgender general population, said, the risk of suicide is still high in trans people.
Yes, I have that listed in my document as one of the studies to look out for because it's so earth-shatteringly stupid. that they would compare post-transition trans people to the general population as a metric for the validity and efficacy of medical transition. To me, this is the kind of study which can only be employed in bad faith. It is so obviously incapable of proving the point it attempts to prove.
Yeah. There is another study I'd like you to add to look out for, and the reason I want you to look out for this is because this is one that Lauren Southern touts as like the best one. It's another Swedish study, not the original one that Ben Shapiro was citing. You may have
these
she
conservatives
cites,
hated Sweden.
Brandstrom. Yeah, I know, right? It's unfortunate because she's gone on to some major political streamer platforms, and she's cited the study, and it's just gone completely uncontested. Not because I think that there's anything transphobic about the streamer, it's just that I don't think this streamer is like able to deal with the studies that she's citing. But yeah, so I'll make just put this study on your radar. I'll send it in the chat. I'll do a general overview of it. So you may hear this second Sweden study cited. The authors are Brandstrom and Pachankis. What their initial study is not really the most important thing. The initial, well, actually, you know what? Let's go through the full thing. This actually is important because both points they actually try to cite. Okay, so one thing though, the initial study of Brandstrom and Pachankis found that gender-affirming hormone therapy wasn't correlated with decrease in hospitalization for suicide. Time being on gender-affirming hormone therapy. Of course, the issue with that was that they didn't have a control group, so they couldn't see what would have happened otherwise. Maybe it would have increased. So what they did after that was they made a second publication.
Then how are they saying without a control group, how could they even make the claim that it had no effect on the rate of hospitalization?
Yeah, so the people making the claim are not the authors. The authors just described that there wasn't a correlation trend. So that's technically true. But of course that all gets lost in translation to people citing the study because they're not, they don't actually.
But
they're not familiar with reading studies, and so
how would they even know the trend if there wasn't a control group?
Oh, they can look at. So the trend can just be like this single group before and after. Right?
Okay. Then longitudinal then. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. So people have taken that to be like, oh, it doesn't work. Well, you don't know that. You don't know what would have happened otherwise. And so then they did a correction. And here I'm linking the correction. I'll screenshot you the relevant chart in the correction. You may see this used. And this is one of the studies. This is one of the go-tos that one of Lauren Southern's prime favorites over here. Right. So you'll see that what they did was they looked at individuals diagnosed with gender incongruence who have received gender-affirming surgery. They looked at individuals diagnosed with gender incongruence who have not received gender-affirming surgery. Well, it looks like at first we have a decent control group here. Because in both cases, it's not general population, it's individuals with gender incongruence. Here are those who receive surgery, here are those who do not receive surgery. And you'll notice there's no statistically significant difference in suicidal ideation.
Yes.
No statistically significant difference, the confidence intervals cross one. Okay. Now, the issue here is just matching people with individuals who do not receive surgery. By doing that, you're including individuals who don't want surgery. Because we're not interested in individuals who, because here's the thing, individuals who have received gender incongruence, who've received gender-affirming surgery, they're individuals who are transgender who desire the surgery and got it. Your comparison group is individuals diagnosed with gender incongruence who have not received gender-affirming surgery. That's not asking the question, let's compare individuals who desire surgery and get it versus individuals who desire surgery and do not get it.
And this group could conceivably have a much lower propensity for suicidality.
Yeah, Yeah, and you'll imagine actually if you if you impose surgery on individuals who didn't, like, the point is we wouldn't expect individuals who did not desire surgery to improve if they get surgery. It's just like, in fact, you may expect the opposite. We're not interested in the question of what's the suicidality of individuals who desire surgery and get it versus individuals who desire and don't desire surgery and don't get. What we're interested in is the comparison of transgender individuals who desire surgery and get the surgery versus transgender individuals who desire the surgery and do not get the surgery for whatever reason. That's what we're interested in. So it's really not surprising why there's no difference in suicidality. Yes, as you mentioned, one explanation can simply be that, well, if you have a lot of people who don't desire surgery, people who desire surgery may just have greater gender dysphoria, they may be pushed to suicide more. Yeah, you want an apples-to-apples comparison. The reason the study I'm about to bring to you is so good is because it really did all of this. And they made sure, first of all, it's the largest transgender study to date. It was published in JAMA very recently. They made sure that the individuals the comparison was desire surgery and get surgery versus desire surgery and not get surgery. And they also made sure that it was, although the data was collected cross-sectionally, they put in constraints to make sure there was at least 2 years time differential between getting the surgery and the outcomes in suicidality. So they wanted both groups to have longitudinal data for there. And it's important. Another thing that they did really well is that they made sure that they're not just asking about lifetime suicidality, but last year suicidality. Some data you may see is that, well, they'll say, okay, well, people who get the gender-affirming therapy is, well, their lifetime suicidality is the same. Well, no fucking shit. Or, like, it's even worse. Like, yeah, sure, like, that includes the time at which they didn't have the therapy. Of course, their lifetime suicidality may not be different or may be worse.
Yeah, it reminds me of an old study that I remember some conservatives using, which was attempting to prove prove a relationship between what was it? Lifetime sexual partners and likelihood to cheat, or sorry, likelihood to get a divorce later. However, was this in a video that I had watched? This might have been in a Sean video. Well, whatever the case may be, the reason the data was fucked is because it was continuing to count the lifetime sexual partners of people after they had already received a divorce. So a person who could have gotten married to their very first sexual partner, then gotten divorced, and then went on to bachelor it up, that person was being counted as, you must have divorced because you had 20 partners or something like that. It's the data range isn't suitable for proving the point,
Yeah, exactly. So this study did all of that. They also included suicide attempts, not just suicidal ideation. So I'm sending that to you in the chat. This is a recent study published in JAMA in April 28, 2021. So they did all of this is probably one of the best cross-sectional studies that I've seen. Number one, because it incorporates constraints that force the data for the purposes of causal inference, to have a longitudinal aspect of it. So don't let someone tell you that it's not a longitudinal study, because the data actually is effectively longitudinal. The second thing is it is the largest study on transgender and transgender individuals and mental health outcomes with gender-affirming therapy to date. It was 27,715 individuals responding.
Cool.
Of which I think, let's see, it was, how many of them ended up having surgery? I think it was like at least, 3,559 of which had a history of gender-affirming surgery. And what they found was that when you compare individuals who had the desire to receive the surgery versus individuals who have desire to receive the surgery and received it versus desire to receive the surgery and did not receive it, it cuts their suicidal, not just ideation, but also attempts. It cuts it in half. And I'll just show you this this figure in terms of certain outcomes. And so I posted that in the chat.
Gotcha.
You'll notice that, so suicidal ideation of individuals who desire the surgery and do not get the surgery, they're over 50%. And that gets cut down to around 30%. Actual attempts, you're looking around 10%, and that's going to get cut down to around like somewhere around 4 or 5% in that ballpark. Now that's just the raw data. Even the multivariate adjusted data ends up being telling the same story. And you look at, I'll just screenshot.
Do they have the results of the multivariate regressive analysis included in the paper?
Yes, they do.
Wonderful.
I'm here. I'll show you. So so here is I'll show you the screenshot here. So this was the results of the multivariate analysis. I'm posting that in the chat. I'm just screenshotting it to you and sending.
So what you're saying is the really killer argument is that gender-affirming surgery is not an effective treatment for binge alcohol use, then.
Yeah, so I mean the point. Yeah, it's exactly that destroys the whole purpose. You got me. But actually, even that, actually, you'll notice that there actually was a statistically significant difference in binge alcohol use.
No. Even for that, yeah, for sure.
Even for that, it works. Yeah.
Hold on, let me read this really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I want to enjoy one of the very narrow ways in which my major overlaps with this type of research. Yeah, okay. I've looked at it, and the p-values are nice and tiny. All right, we're all good. Assessment.
You'll notice on the topic of p-values, they even went further than this. So one of they went even more conservative, not in the political sense, but in the causal assessment sense. So one of the concerns when you're looking at p-values is something called like the family-wise error rate, or the problem of multiple comparisons, essentially like p-hacking. I'm sure you've probably heard of it.
Yes, if you strain the constraints of data far enough, trying as best as you can to arrive at a conclusion, you can eventually get the data value down low enough to make something approximating a convincing argument. You know, like you know, if your argument would be like, "Are black people dumb?" You know, you can be like, well, if I take data from this one neighborhood and then I sample them from October 7th, 1996 to this, and that was right when a giant lead paint outbreak was in the news. You know, like that kind of stuff. You know, there's always a way to twist the data.
Yeah, the specific type of twist I'm talking about is a multiple comparison. So like the example here would be if you took a black person and you said, okay, well, are black people dumber? And then let's say, well, I do a standard IQ test. Okay, well, now I do a verbal IQ. Okay, well, now I do a nonverbal IQ. Okay, well, now I do like some metric for like spatial temporal analysis, and then I'll do like a facial recognition study. Now I'll do like some general like reaction time study, and like eventually, if you keep doing these studies,
you will eventually
all these
find
different metrics.
Yeah.
And then one of them is just bound to hit statistical significance spuriously, because if you think about where we standardly set our alpha, it's going to be at 0.05. And if we have enough simultaneous comparisons, eventually one of them is going to be just randomly lower than that. And then the headline will read, oh, okay, well, black people are dumber, and here's why. Like, we did all these tests, and like, here's the one that was statistically significant.
In a way, there's almost a desired p-value for p-values, where if you try to find like a spurious correlation, if you strain hard enough, you'll eventually find it. So you need to find the reliability of the data that you're using to prove your conclusion.
Yeah, that's sort of what they've actually what they've actually put constraints on. So they say, okay, well, now first of all, this study didn't even do it. They didn't even look at a whole bunch of outcomes. I think they looked at like 11 or so. But even that, they say, okay, well, maybe it's a spurious correlation. So what they did was something called a correction. There are different ways of correcting for problems of multiple comparisons. The easiest way to do it is something called the Bonferroni correction. You just simply take your alpha value and divide it by the number of comparisons. So in this case, if we're taking like 11 divided by 0.05, 0.05 divided by 11, we're going to get 0.004. And so that's going to be our new alpha. And so anything under any p-value under 0.004 is going to be statistically significant. And you'll notice that these values for suicidality for those who receive all desired surgeries compared to receive some desired surgeries, they're actually, the ones who received all desired surgeries, those p-values are actually less than 0.001. So they are statistically significant, even correcting for a concern. And mind you,
they're very statistically significant at that point. Yes.
Yeah, it's a very conservative correction. It's not the only correction out there. There are other corrections that will give you more like leeway. But the Bonferroni is notorious for being the most conservative. Like you really have to get like the strongest p-value, and it's not just the p-value. Like the effect size is also like really strong. The odds ratio here is 0.44. It's cutting the odds down by more than half. So the reason this is, in my view, better than anything the Cornell analysis has put together is it actually answers the question in the best way. It answers the question with all the constraints there that you can get based on the type of study you can do in answering this question, like short of a randomized controlled trial or something, short of like this crazy prospective cohort data with this, like it's the largest transgender study to date. It has robust numbers in both the control group and the intervention group. The question is the control group is actually framed appropriately. The statistical analysis were overly conservative, and yet the results were so robust. The adjustments were the multivariate adjustments, they adjusted for age, education, employment status, family rejection, gender identity, health insurance, household income, race, ethnicity, sex assigned at birth, sexual orientation, history of gender affirming counseling, pubertal suppression, history of gender affirming hormone therapy. So they're just looking at the effect of the surgery here. So here's the here's what they're adjusting. They're adjusting for age, education, employment status. Those are the things I just mentioned exactly. So this is really what I think should be the go-to study for people.
Well, I will certainly be using it from now on. I'll add it to my document at the very least.
Yeah, definitely. There are some other studies that do have this appropriate control group. It's not just this study, but they're less robust than this study. Like this really is like something to definitely like put in the docs. Some minor, like just very, very minor nitpicks. Like the Cornell study, I wouldn't refer to it as like a meta-analysis in your research doc.
You don't think so?
It's not a meta-analysis. It's a review. Meta-analyses perform meta-analytic summations. So they'll do some sort of model, whether it be an inverse variance model, or it'll be a mean difference model, or some sort of. The purpose is to take the results of individual studies and pull them into one result that has its own confidence.
Okay. Would you say I'm a liar?
Cornell, yeah. No, you're not a liar.
Give me shit. No, I'll correct that then. As soon as I remember to.
Yeah. Okay, I think those are the main things. I mean, there's probably other things that I may bring to your attention in the future, but those are like the main hitting points. I mean, there's a whole bunch of like complete cesspool of transphobia with all these like different that goes into like a whole data points. But so if you ever like if there's any like
I know
may need help like
I'm not amazing at responding quickly, but considering how often this stuff comes up for me, I'd be delighted to keep in contact so you can help me through any future concerns. Hopefully not from a biased perspective, of course. If there's a legitimate point that, you know, transphobes make, unfortunate as that would be, I'd still like to know it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I do a good job at that. I think most people do know me for being pretty brutal too. Like a lot of like, I'm not a very well. I don't know if you're familiar with me. I'm not a very well liked person across many different platforms, across many different like ideologies.
Well, I know
but
that you're not liked in my
yeah.
Discord because you apparently have the rehab role.
Yes, I have the rehab role for something I never spoke about in your Discord ever.
Oh, that's not very fair.
Hey, tell your mods that. They put me, they put the rehab role on me and basically did this inquisition where they were like, they asked me about like some view that they asked me about my views that I didn't even mention ever in the Discord. Two of the views that I have mentioned, but they were actually like friendly views that were accepted, and then there's this, and then like some other view wasn't okay with them. Like my views on.
I don't control the Discord moderation.
Yeah. I know. They told me that too. They told me like you're not like in charge of your Discord. But anyway, that's it's so apparent. So I'm on a. If I don't change my views, I'm being rehabilitated. And if I don't change my views, I'm going to be banned in 30 days. But that's okay. I know you're not in charge of that.
That's okay. Well, you might get the administrative oversight. You know, I have the master key to the Discord. The war continues.
There you go.
In all seriousness, I really do appreciate you coming on here and educating us all.
Yeah, for sure. And if it's not just like for trans issues, like if there's any like study or any statistics or any like meta-analysis or any like study that you're having issues with at all, like feel free to send it my way. I'll be happy to like jump on stream and talk it through.
Your education outstrips mine significantly, so I'm very, very happy to have your perspective on these issues, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Hey, listen, it was really good talking to you, Vaush.
Likewise, thank you very, very much. And yeah, I'll keep in contact. You have my Twitter. Take care.
Yeah, for sure. Take care.